Hello everybody! If you're a student just like me going through a biology course trying to understand that thing they call evolution, don't worry. On this video we're going to try to explain a little bit more about the concepts of evolution and the main mechanisms through which it happens. If you're confused about Darwin and bottleneck effect, simply put on your headsets and let's get started on this party. No matter how complex the concept of evolution might be, I am pretty sure this is not the first time you hear of it. As a matter of fact, if you have ever heard of Pokemon, and if you're a college student, there is a huge chance you used to watch it as a child, you probably know exactly what evolution means, right? I mean, in the show, all you needed to do was to train your little creature and then all of a sudden it would start, shining and it would become a different animal. And I mean, evolution in real life shouldn't really be that different from it, right?
Oh, what's the matter, Charmander?
Charmander looks funny.
It's evolving!
Well, no matter how cool evolution might be in Pokemon, in real life, it's a bit more complex than that.
Congratulations, Charmander!
Let's start with the basics. For instance, we have to understand that the process of evolution in Pokemon isn't really what we call evolution in real life. In Pokemon, the creatures go through a metamorphosis, that is, a rapid change over time during the lifespan of a creature. In fact, the creature passes through different stages of their lives in which they have different physical forms. And that is not necessarily evolution, because in evolution, things are a bit more complex. In fact, the magnitude of evolution is not only larger in number but also in time. You have to understand that when we're speaking about evolution, we're not talking about a single individual, but rather a population of similar individuals changing over time. And by time, we mean millions of years. To determine if a species has evolved or not, you really have to look into this population over time and see if their genes have been persisted or repressed, and if there have been significant changes in their genetic makeup which differentiate them enough for their predecessors, that way creating a new species.
Let's follow up with what Gabe said. So there was once this big traveler in the 1800s named Charles Darwin who observed many examples of types of adaptations, which are characteristics of organisms that enhance their survival and reproduction in specific environments. Some might call it a striking unity. When he went to the Galapagos Islands, for instance, he noticed that the animals present here varied greatly from the ones in the mainland, an example being the finches he observed, and how their beaks were related to the sizes of the seeds that they ate. He was then able to deduce the complementary relationship that structure has with function. He definitely deserves a thumbs up for that one. Yet the question remained, what's going on that's generating this phenomenon? Some years went by, and Darwin theorized that individuals with certain inherited characteristics leave more offspring than individuals with other characteristics. We call this process natural selection. Take, for example, bacteria and how they grow immune to certain medication. When introduced, whatever it is, some bacteria are not resistant to it and die as a result, like the red bacteria in this case. Yet if some bacteria prove to be resistant to the medication and survive long enough to reproduce, a new population is generated who are all resistant to the medication, like our blue population over here. We like to call this survival of the fittest, showing that whoever best fits the environment is the one with the best chance of their traits being passed down and have the population, wait for it, evolve as a result of it. So where does mutation fit in all of this? To answer that, we just have to get a little more technical. Remember that a phenotype, or the observable characteristics of an organism, like the resistance to a certain medication, comes about from the genotype, an organism's genetic composition. Genes are distinct sequences of nucleotides which are part of the chromosome. Don't worry, I won't be pulling out any Punnett squares here. Let's just imagine that we're looking at some organism's DNA sequence. Mind you, this is more than a bunch of letters. When we have an identified sequence, if causally analyzed properly, we have knowledge of which specific proteins are made, and as organic chemistry taught us, proteins are critical for life. So, back to the question, there's a certain class of evolution where a random change in an organism's genetic makeup influences the population's gene pool. If we take this identified chromosome and change a single base pair, what we have is a point mutation which has the chance to code for a different amino acid polypeptide, and so on.
Thanks, Matt. So, back to mutations. They can either be harmful or beneficial to the organisms. Let's choose flowers as an example. Let's imagine that some types of flowers thrive normally, while those with some mystery mutation perish as a result. The sad truth of evolution. Natural selection tends to remove the less fit individuals, allowing more fit individuals to survive and form what we call a population. As you can see, a simple insertion or deletion of a single amino acid can completely change a DNA sequence, as well as the proteins it creates and eventually the organism itself. Natural selection can alter the frequency distribution of heritable traits in 3 ways, depending on which phenotypes in a population are favored. The 3 modes of selection are directional, disruptive, and stabilizing selection. To understand this, let's backpedal to our friends the finches. Here you have 3 types of finches, with different beaks of various sizes related to the size of the seeds that they eat. The first case illustrates directional selection, where only one phenotype is favored and thus survives. So an increase in the size of seeds available as food leads the finches with the largest beak to survive. Thus, more of their offspring were born, and so on. The second case would be disruptive selection, where an environmental condition favors individuals at both extremes of a phenotypic range over those with intermediate phenotypes. If there were only large hard seeds and small soft seed, then only the finches with thick, short beaks and those with long, thin beaks would be able to reproduce efficiently. Whereas the poor finch with the intermediate beak would not favor as well. But we got you, middle finch. In the case that there were some intermediate seeds in the middle, then stabilizing selection would act against extreme variants and favor our intermediate variants. Once again, Darwin's views on the role of environmental factors in the screening of heritable variation were heavily influenced by artificial selection. What's artificial selection? Dog breeding can help us here. Feelings tend to get hurt when dogs are involved, so bear with us. While natural selection tends to favor the fittest individuals in a certain environment, artificial selection may not do so, as in the case of this pug. While insanely cute, they have been bred in which their characteristics are not suitable for their survival. This happens because of such artificial selection, where the breeding is not random and is being controlled. Another mechanism of evolution may occur during the migration of individuals from one group or location to another. When the migrating individuals interbreed with the new population, they contribute their genes to the gene pool of the local population. This establishes gene flow in the population. Gene flow occurs, for example, when a Japanese family is introduced to a completely English-speaking population. As observed, over time, Japanese, although spoken by far less people, will be spoken by more than just that initial Japanese family. Gene flow tends to reduce differences between populations. If extensive enough, gene flow can combine neighboring populations into a single population with a common gene pool. Another mechanism for evolution is genetic drift, which can occur when a small group of individuals leave a population and establish a new one in a geographically isolated region. For example, when a small population of fish is placed in a lake, the fish population would evolve into one that is different from the original. Fitness of a population is not considered in genetic drift, nor does genetic drift occur in a very large population. There are 2 extensions of genetic drift that specify certain situations. The founder effect occurs when a new population is started by a small number of individuals who do not represent the gene pool of their larger source population. The bottleneck effect occurs when the numbers of individuals in a large population are drastically reduced by a disaster.
So to close it up, we really want you guys to understand that Pokemon is really cool and what you see on TV might be really nice, but to really understand what happens in this world, you have to change that Pokeball for a biology book and get started on that studying, because that's the only way that you are going to evolve as a student. See you next time!